All right. So we have the pleasure of having three folks who've been working in this field for many, many years. And we're just going to ask them to talk about their own journey and some of the challenges and some of the strategies that they use in this work. I'd just like to start by introducing our panelists. We have Melissa Burgess from HealthNet and the Homeless Initiative Program. We have Emily Pike, who is Executive Director of New Hope for Families and Chair of the South Central Housing Network, and Forrest Gilmore, who's Executive Director of Beacon, Inc. So let's first of all give them a round of applause. Thank you. So I'd like to start off by asking each of you to kind of talk a little bit about how you got into this field, what your journey to this point has been, and a little bit about the why of why you do this work. We'll start with you, Forrest.
When you sit down last. Yeah,
that's what you get, buddy.
People need to use the restroom. Come on. It's a natural bodily function. I think, so when I was in high school, in my senior year, I dressed up as Santa Claus and with a friend, and we sold photos with Santa Claus to this body dressed up as Santa Claus and to Skinny Claus to raise local money for our local homeless shelter, and I think that was one of my earliest kind of connections with homelessness and the work of homelessness. It's been there for a long time, and going back a long time, even to those Gen Xers there who remember the Phil Collins video where he featured kind of numbers across the screen about how many people were experiencing homelessness. It dates me a little bit. Some of you may remember that. But so there was kind of a connection with that work for a long time, but it never entered into kind of a professional realm except in a distant way. Started out as a Unitarian Universalist minister and always had a social justice component to that work. That was a big part of why I did that. I chose that career. But becoming into homelessness and homelessness work was almost an accident. It was really a little bit fortuitous in that I had left my job as a minister to come to Bloomington with my family. At the time I was married, and this is the hometown of my now ex-wife, but we came here because we weren't doing so well in where we were, and so we came here trying to see if we could make our lives a little bit better, and we didn't end up staying married, but as I was looking for work here, I thought that I would see if I could volunteer in the local homeless shelter, just to, occupy some of my time. I was always doing that search, and had that conversation, and about a week after that conversation, a job appeared in the paper for the assistant director at Shalom Center, and I applied to that job, and somehow with virtually no experience in homeless services, they hired me, and that was 12 years ago, so it's kind of evolved from that, and it's really become a passion, and it's not just work, it's a purpose, it's a mission, and I think for the first time in my life, I felt like I was in a career that felt right. Like it didn't feel like I was in the wrong place. Like all my other previous careers, to some degree, I felt an itching to do something different or make it different or have it look different. And this one was like, you're where you need to be. And that's kind of been with me the whole time. And it's been very hard and very difficult and challenging work all these years, but that's been the core of why it's held all these years. It's just a feeling of rightness and connection to that. Yeah.
Thanks.
So, yeah.
Emily, how about you?
Yeah, I came into this work, I've been passionate about nonprofits for a long time. I joined my first nonprofit board as a high schooler. It was the American Red Cross Hoosier Hills chapter, Lawrence County. And I found that really, really meaningful personally. I really enjoyed it. I continued to work in nonprofits as I progressed through school. And then I spent a couple of years in the Peace Corps. And really, that's where I decided that I would make working in a serving profession my career. And I really thought that I would do that internationally. I came here to attend SPIA, and while I was at SPIA, I began doing some volunteer work with some of the founders of what was then called New Hope Family Shelter. And I quickly took a part-time job there, and then I accidentally never left. And New Hope has just been such a perfect fit for me. So I've been there for 10 and a half years. It was a brand new agency when I came on board, and it was such an exciting thing to be able to help build it. But it really married kind of a couple of my passions. The first, as I've already mentioned, is nonprofit work. I like the way nonprofits work. I like the community of nonprofits. I like the autonomy of many nonprofits. And most importantly, I like the way that nonprofits require communities and people to come together to fulfill a common goal. Because that's really what nonprofits do, right? That's our contract with the community, is we're going to help you meet the goals that you already have. So that's one of the passions. And then the other is children and families and parents, helping them achieve their own goals for themselves. I think often we don't treat children with the autonomy that they deserve, and we often don't treat underserved populations with the autonomy they deserve. And that's a really disappointing parallel to draw, right? That we sometimes, in fact, treat adults in crisis as if they are children. And we're not treating children well to start with, so it's a really poor baseline. But being able to say, we want to do this, we want to serve all members of a family, was really important for me. So one of the key tenets of the Peace Corps is that what we do is we provide skilled people to help communities meet needs that they have identified. And I think that's our role as nonprofits, and I feel really privileged to do that. I'm really privileged to continue developing my skills in order to meet those needs better.
It's interesting that both of you started in some way with volunteer and then part-time and then kind of to where you are today. Is that your trajectory too, Melissa?
Yeah, so kind of similar. As a child, I grew up in Indy, and my sister and I would always ask my mom to drive by the homeless shelter. We were just really intrigued. And grew up in the church and always served. And but then my mom is a retired social worker, so she worked for prevention of child abuse and constantly volunteered and did different service projects with her as well. Then I went to college, and I guess I was bit by the bug. I decided to be a social worker as well. And when I graduated, I wasn't quite sure what I wanted to do, and I joined AmeriCorps and did my service at a day service center, Horizon House in Indy, and that just began my journey in homeless services, and spent a lot of time on outreach, and figured that just was my passion. And so through my journey, then I ended up in homeless services. It's been over 20 years now. Working also in substance abuse and permanent supportive housing, mental health. So kind of just a gamut of things. And really it's purpose. And I'll share a little more later, I guess, but I know this is about self-care as well, and kind of hit the wall and got crispy around the edges and needed to take a break for a minute. Just recently transitioned back because I knew I was not going to stay away long, but I knew I had to leave for a minute and take care of myself. But yeah, it's purpose and meaning, gratitude, humble. I eat my humble pie every day, so.
I like the phrase crispy around the edges. I'm going to totally steal that.
Yeah.
Well, I know that this is challenging work, and it's one of the reasons why we're here today. Can you talk a little bit about the challenges that you and your staff face and some of the strategies that you have to deal with that? Well, let's start with you, Emily.
Sure. Challenges are multiple. I think there are some challenges that are specific to working in the field that we all do, and then there are some that are general to nonprofits. The challenges that I think are really specific to our work at New Hope, and that I'm sure are shared, are the tremendous emotional labor that comes with this work, right? It is, and not so much me, but the people sitting right in front of me, who all work at New Hope, who will sometimes spend many hours every day with someone crying in their office. And we might be able to help them, and we might not be able to help them. Because we help people get housed, and people have all sorts of issues that they're looking for help with, they're looking for support with, and that's very difficult. It's very difficult to try and triage all the needs that you see in front of you, because as one person, there's only so much that you can get done. And I would say that's true of our early learning teachers as well. Just recognizing that there's only so much you can do, and feeling every day at the end of the day like you didn't get it done, right? Because you're never going to get it done. And I think that is the biggest thing. The second thing that I would say, which is general to this field, is that sometimes we have an idea that what you need to be successful in this field is to have a really big heart. And that is the very beginning of a long list of things that you need, including training and support and a living wage. And I think we often think, and I say all the time, I feel really privileged to do something that I feel so passionate about. I know a lot of people aren't that lucky. But that doesn't mean that people who work in these fields should also be qualifying for the services we offer, right? And I think recognizing that is one of the biggest things that we've done at New Hope in the past 5 years. So it really is very simple. Pay people more money to do less work. So recognize that people need to take breaks. We need to support one another. I think that's a thing we do really well at New Hope, is say, hey, Mary's on vacation. Under no circumstances do I want anyone to call her, okay? You call someone else.
Does that actually happen?
I don't know. I think we do pretty well. We do pretty well. I mean, if the building's on fire, I want to call, but otherwise, And I think it's something that has been a lot of work to get to that point in our culture. But for the most part, when people are off, we're very, very serious about it. Lose their number for the week. And I think being able to support one another is important in that way. And as a leader, it's something that I've had to really work on. Because what we know is that our teams will adopt the attitude that we have oftentimes. And so if I say, okay, nobody bother Chase while he's on vacation, but I call in 7 times while I'm on vacation, that sends a message to other people on the team that they should be doing that too. So that was a really long answer. I apologize.
Oh, not at all. Thank you. Melissa, I'm going to go back to you for that question.
Yeah. Wow, challenges. It's a daily basis, especially, we are starting a new team here in Bloomington, a medical team. We now are tagging ourselves kind of a street medicine team. So the challenge is just with that, system challenges with, HRSA and just the logistics and fundamentals of doing street medicine have definitely been a challenge. And then on top of that, obviously kind of to piggyback on what Emily said, the trauma, the secondary trauma that we experience just by virtue of doing our job, going into the encampments, being on the streets, working with people in housing, and just trying hard to manage that. And as somebody who supervises somebody, trying to manage that for our staff as well. So I think, being very mindful about, for me, being mindful about how I am, because like Emily had said, how I behave kind of then trickles down. And so, but just being very present and available and supportive and just working through whatever is happening that day, celebrating small successes, right? Every little success. If somebody, if we walk up to an encampment, we're like, hey, it's outreach, knock, knock, and they may say, leave me alone today. Okay, all right, we'll leave you alone today. We're going to come back tomorrow. Kind of like what Leah was saying with that assertive engagement. I'm a bulldog, and so we're going to come back the next day, and it's a huge success if they say, okay, all right, I'll talk to you today. Like, it's just the little things. So, but really, again, training, being mindful, being present, taking care of yourself, just to work through all of just the daily challenges. But that secondary trauma is real, and we need to pay attention to that. So,
Thank you. How about you, Forrest?
I think you both said some amazing things, and I don't want to repeat them. So I'm trying to think of something else. So I'll probably say a couple of things that are a little different from that. One thing that I think I feel a struggle with, and I know that I think my staff feels struggle with a lot, and is failure, in the sense that that so much of this work, for lack of better words, doesn't succeed or doesn't meet the goals that we hope, or confronts continued suffering, or sees a person fall back, or you let down a colleague, or it's to some degree, I think, homelessness and the issue of homelessness and all the things that surround it. In some ways, it feels a bit like a tidal wave, and it's a massive issue, and that we, to some degree, as a society, place the responsibility primarily of dealing with that issue on nonprofits is a bit insane, and so there's this constant, I think, navigation or challenge of, yes, we're doing great work, and oh my God, that tidal wave is really tall. and I think confronting those two things is hard, because we are all in this work to succeed, to help, to care, to love, to support, to reduce and eliminate suffering as much as that's humanly possible. And so that confrontation is challenging all the time. And the other thing that I would add is an issue around dignity and bigotry, and that again, this work is incredibly difficult. And one of the things that I think all of us in this work confront on a regular basis, but it was really interesting moving into the executive director role from a direct service role to more of an administrative and public outward-facing role, seeing how much hatred and is directed at people that we work with, and going and seeing that and confronting that and trying to help and support people and lift people up, while at the same time confronting sometimes a portion of the community that just really hates what you do and hates the people that you serve. And that's also, I find, incredibly and surprisingly challenging. It's a side of the work that I didn't expect to be a part of the work, was dealing with that kind of community, and obviously not universal. There's so many caring people, and there are some that also are quite, bring that to the work. And so it's not just being in front of a person who's in suffering and helping them, it's also dealing with a community that's sometimes antagonistic to what you do.
Yeah, I think that's a really great point. I'm going to pause and see if anybody has questions from you all for the panelists. Anything you'd like to bring up, talk about, get their insights on? At any point, just holler out, and we will get your question asked. I think you've touched on this a little bit, but some of the things that you do specifically to keep yourself motivated and to avoid the crispy edges, and then to your staff too. What are some things that you've done that you think are successful, or some things that you've heard about that you think would be, at some point, you'd like to implement? Melissa?
Being vulnerable and communicating with my colleagues, with the staff. and because a lot of times I think we're in the same boat. We may have different feelings about things, but being vulnerable enough to have a conversation and say, hey, I'm struggling, can I talk with you, or and then just other self-care. I'm kind of an introvert, and so I love my time, and I live in Indy, and so I drive to Bloomington, and so that time is really precious to me most of the time. Sometimes it can get rough on the road, but that's my debriefing time, and that's my processing time to say, how the day went, or I turn the radio up and just jam out, and I'm that person in the car singing loud, and just to wash the day away. And I love to camp as well, so I love to be outside, doing yard work. Family is really important to me, so coping, having a close family. So those are some of the types of things that I like to do.
And for your staff, do you think or do you communicate those to your staff?
I do. I'll be vulnerable with the staff for sure. I don't know, Margaret's sitting right there, but I think we have a really solid relationship, and I think I probably annoy her, like, hey, how are you doing today? Like, just checking in, and we all grieve and manage differently. And so I think with the staff, recognizing everybody's different. And so how does everybody process? If somebody's quiet, that doesn't mean that they don't want to talk with you right now. Maybe just check in with them and say, hey, I'm here, go back a little bit later. And just being present and supportive as much as you can, having the open door policy per se. And also the power thing, not having them come to you, but you go to them is really important, because we're on the same playing field. I may have a different title, I may have few different objectives in my job description, but we're the same person, and so I want to be there and be present.
That's great. How about you, Emily?
Yeah. I really appreciate what Melissa said about vulnerability, and I think that is a hard thing. I think one of the things about that for me is trying to set an attitude and a culture of you don't have to account for every minute of your day, right? I think that was something that I was really guilty of early in my time at New Hope. And I think that can get a little performative, right? I know for me it was, because it was coming from a place of insecurity. I felt like I was young to be in my job, and maybe people thought that I wasn't ready for it, and so I was going to make sure that everybody saw me working really hard all the time. And when I see people on my team doing that, I think, oh man, that was so tiring. I remember that. And so trying to make some space for them not to do that by really intentionally not doing that myself, with varying degrees of success still, right? Because I am still the person that I am. But trying to say, hey, I'm going home early. I'm not feeling well. I'm going to go meet my mom for lunch. I'm going to be in late. I have a dentist appointment. Because when we do that as leaders, it makes space for everyone else to say, hey, my kid's sick. I want to work from home this afternoon. Or my kid's sick. I can't work this afternoon. And recognizing that just because we all know how to work from home now doesn't mean you can't be home and not work. We actually saw when we implemented working from home that our PTO usage went way down. And so that's something we're really working on as an agency now is, hey, I noticed that you have 3 weeks of PTO saved up. When's your next vacation? What do you have planned? Can you take some half days in the next couple of weeks? What would you like to do? So those are some things we're trying to do as an agency. And just on a personal level, it's something that I've been really struggling with. I'm expecting this winter, and I am sick all the time. And it's really difficult for me to say to my team, hey guys, I'm so sorry, can someone else run this meeting for me? I'm gonna be just taking a break in the middle of the day and I'll be back, or whatever it is. But what I try to say to myself is that's making space for other people to also say what they need. Because what I know about our workplace is that we really want to support each other. And when people tell us what they need, we're better able to do that. So on a personal level, I have a growing menagerie of pets at my house, whom I love and spend a lot of time with. I also really love to hike. So unfortunately, I live up by Griffey, and we go on some long hikes almost every week. So we being me and my very giant dog.
It's a very cute dog. Forrest?
Well, organizationally, one of the things we're just starting to do, and I hope it has a lot of effect and value, is taking that secondary trauma situation really seriously, and we did a training with a trauma therapist, and brought them into the organization, and what my hope is to do like a training, and we did some EMDR training and some basic stuff that you could use with our clients, but more importantly, that stuff you could use with yourself. And we're going to do a follow-up training on that soon, and then my hope is that we can start to have, like, on a monthly basis, just kind of a group meeting where people can come and in a group session meet with a trauma therapist on a regular basis, and I think that's going to be one thing that will be really helpful, because I find that, and I think this has been spoken to, but a lot of trauma therapy is it's not handled in the same way that, say, talking therapy works. It really gets into your bones, and so you have to work with it differently than traditional talk therapy often, and so bringing in someone specializing in trauma, I think, is really important. And it's been important for me personally as well, working with a trauma therapist and kind of doing some of that work and clearing out some of that. I think probably the other thing too, I think we often struggle with this, but personally, self-care is hard, and I think that hard work dynamic is a real challenging one. Because I think a lot of our identity can be built around hard work. So it's hard to say no to that monster sometimes. But interestingly, one of the things that I found is that in my work, there was a very kind of like on and off or work and then crash cycle. So it was kind of like go home and then go watch TV and be in the couch, and TV and couch was self-care. And what I've learned is that self-care is really an active process, and so it requires energy. So that's annoying. But it requires more than, like, the couch is good rest, but it doesn't actually restore or renew. And so for me, more recently, what that's meant for me in the last year is a regular workout program, walking and weights, and also daily meditation, and those things, and just being really active around those things has been personally very helpful, especially over the last year.
Going to do an audience check to see if there are any questions yet for you all. We're coming close to the end of our panel discussion. I guess I'd like to wrap up by asking you, if you were talking to somebody who's just at the beginning of their career in this field, what is something that you wish you had known when you started out, and what kind of advice would you give someone who's new to this? Anybody want to take that one?
I live by a phrase that has many different variations, but it's something along the lines of, we consistently overestimate what we can accomplish in a year and underestimate what we can accomplish in 10. And so for me, I think impact is built over the long term. And so that means, how do you get yourself able to make it to the long term? That there's no great value in working incredibly difficult for 1 year and burning out and then having to leave the profession. It's not helpful. It's not impactful. It's not the real value that we need in doing this work. So that's my regular advice. Think long term. Think 10 years instead of 1.
It's great advice. Melissa?
Yeah, I would mimic that. Like, I think going into it, I think I'll say for us, in my journey, been high turnover. And so when you find folks, not that, you find some good, solid people, and they just spin their wheels so quickly, and then they burn out, and then they're gone. And so my advice would slow down, take a breath, rely on your mentors, ask them, because, I wish I would have done that more, valued and appreciated my mentors when I first started, because, I was the young, eager kid, and, I wish I would have paid more attention to listening to them, because they would have told me to slow down and take a breath, and I feel very, very fortunate that I've done this work as long as I have. Hit some bumps, but I would slow down and definitely take a breath. I love to watch the new folks coming into the field and the younger ones, and they're just so energized and they're so eager, and that's re-energizing to me. So yeah.
I agree with that a lot. I love, one of my favorite things is having interns, right? Because they're so energetic and they're so bad at it. And it's just, and which I like, it feels really familiar to me. I'm like, oh, I remember doing it really hard wrong. And I think just having some space for yourself to try new things. And for me, a hard lesson to learn was that part of professional growth is changing your mind. It's learning new things and so doing it differently. And I think it feels really challenging, and it's really tempting to say, oh gosh, I said we'd never do this. And now here we are 3 years later, and I'm like, hey guys, remember how I said we would never? Well, actually. And I think, but that's a sign of growth, right? And so is compromise, and so is taking a small victory today. And I think Forrest is the person who taught me we overestimate what we can do in a year, and we underestimate what we can do in 10. And that's something that we have seen over and over again at New Hope. But I think part of getting to all that you can do in 5 years or in 10 years is accepting small victories where you can have them. And so, working always for progress and not perfection, both, in your professional work, but also in your personal development. That I'm not doing it perfectly, but I hope I'm doing it better than I did last year.
Thank you so much. Let's give a round to our panelists. Thank you very much.